Hello again, this is Dr. Joe Angley, and in this presentation we will be reviewing water quality, including the types of contaminants that are most commonly present in water bodies. After completing this lecture, you should be able to define the term water pollution and identify the most common types and sources of water contamination in the United States. Water pollution is any physical, biological, or chemical change in water quality that adversely affects living organisms. We also consider water to be polluted if it becomes unsuitable for its desired use. There are many sources of natural water pollution. For example, seeps deep on the floor of the Gulf of Mexico constantly release oil droplets. Herds of animals deposit urine and feces on waters across the countryside. And natural erosion processes contribute to sediment loading in waterways. However, in this lecture, we will remain focused on human-caused changes in water quality. Pollution control standards and regulations usually distinguish between point and non-point pollution sources. Factories, power plants, sewage treatment plants, underground coal mines, and oil wells are classified as point sources because they discharge pollution from a specific location, such as a drain pipe, a ditch, or a sewer outfall. These sources are discrete and identifiable, so they are relatively easy to monitor and regulate. It is generally possible to divert effluent from the waste streams of these sources and treat it before it enters the environment. In contrast, non-point sources of water pollution are diffuse, having no specific location where they discharge into a particular body of water. They are much harder to monitor and regulate than point sources because their origins are hard to identify. Non-point sources include runoff from farm fields and feedlots, golf courses, lawns and gardens, construction sites, logging areas, roads, streets, and parking lots. To this day, we have not been effective at dealing with the multitude of non-point pollution sources. Atmospheric deposition is a type of non-point source pollution. Contaminants are carried by air currents and precipitated into watersheds or directly onto surface waters as rain, snow, or dry particles. Atmospheric deposition of the herbicide atrazine is believed to introduce some 600,000 kilograms of the herbicide into the Great Lakes. Contaminants can also evaporate from water, move through the atmosphere, and then be redeposited again. The most serious water pollutants in terms of human health worldwide are pathogenic or disease-causing organisms. Among the most important waterborne diseases are typhoid, cholera, bacterial and amoebic dysentery, enteritis, polio, infectious hepatitis, and schistosomiasis. Malaria, yellow fever, and filariasis are transmitted by insects that have aquatic larvae. Altogether, at least 25 million deaths each year are blamed on water-related diseases. Nearly two-thirds of the mortalities of children under 5 years old in poor countries are linked to these diseases. Detecting specific pathogens in water is difficult, time-consuming, and costly, so water quality is usually described in terms of concentrations of coliform bacteria, any of the many types that commonly live in the colon or intestines of humans and animals. The most common of these is Escherichia coli or E. coli. Other bacteria such as Shigella, Salmonella, or Yersinia can also cause serious, even fatal illnesses. If any coliform bacteria are present in a water sample, infectious pathogens are assumed to be present as well, and the Environmental Protection Agency considers the water unsafe for drinking. The limit for coliform bacteria in natural waters is 100 colony-forming units per mil. When waters exceed this level, they are normally closed to swimming and public use. Oxygen is removed from water by respiration and chemical processes that consume oxygen. Because oxygen is so important in water, dissolved oxygen levels are often measured to compare water quality in different places. Adding organic materials such as sewage or paper pulp to water stimulates the activity and oxygen consumption by decomposers such as bacteria. Biochemical oxygen demand, or the amount of dissolved oxygen that's consumed by aquatic microorganisms, is another standard measure of water contamination. Alternatively, chemical oxygen demand, or COD, is a measure of all the organic matter in the water. This figure shows oxygen sag downstream of an organic source, such as sewage outfall or an industrial discharge. The addition of the organic material creates a large biochemical oxygen demand and results in a reduction of oxygen in the waterway. A great deal of time and distance may be required for the stream and its inhabitants to recover. Note that when dissolved oxygen is very low, fish disappear from the waterway, which then becomes dominated by fungi, sludge worms, and anaerobic bacteria. Only after oxygen levels have increased will fish return. A simple indicator of water quality is the presence of fish species such as trout. Water clarity or transparency is affected by sediments, chemicals, and the abundance of plankton organisms like algae. Clarity is a useful measure of water quality and water pollution. Rivers and lakes that have clear water and low biological productivity are said to be oligotrophic. By contrast, eutrophic or well-nourished waters are rich in organisms and organic materials. Here we see an example of an oligotrophic lake. Note the clear water, lack of algae, and excessive aquatic plants. However, the lack of food may limit the available number of biological species as food supplies are limited. In this slide, we see an example of a eutrophic lake. Nutrients from agriculture and domestic sources have stimulated growth of algae and aquatic plants. This reduces water quality, alters the species composition, and lowers the lake's recreational and aesthetic values. We distinguish between two types of eutrophication. Normal eutrophication is a natural process of increasing the nutrient levels and biological productivity. It's a normal part of successional changes in most lakes. Algal blooms are an excellent example of cultural eutrophication. When human activities greatly accelerate eutrophication, we call this effect cultural eutrophication. Cultural eutrophication is caused mainly by increased nutrient input into a water body. Increased productivity in an aquatic system sometimes can be beneficial. Fish and other desirable species may grow faster, providing a welcome food source. However, eutrophication produces blooms of algae or thick growths of aquatic plants that are stimulated by elevated phosphorus or nitrogen levels. Bacterial populations then increase, fed by the larger amounts of organic matter. The water often becomes cloudy or turbid and has unpleasant tastes and odors. Cultural eutrophication can accelerate the, quote, aging of a water body enormously over natural rates. Lakes and reservoirs that normally might exist for hundreds and thousands of years can become filled in a matter of decades. Among the chemicals of greatest concern are heavy metals such as mercury, lead, tin, and cadmium. Many metals, such as these, are highly toxic in minute concentrations. Because metals are highly persistent, they accumulate in food chains and have a cumulative effect in humans. Currently, the most widespread toxic metal contamination in North America is mercury, released from the incineration and coal burning of power plants. Transported through the air, mercury precipitates in water supplies, where it bioconcentrates in food webs to reach dangerous levels in the top predators. As a general rule, Americans are warned not to eat more than one meal of wild-caught fish per week. Top marine predators such as sharks, swordfish, bluefin tuna, and king mackerel tend to have especially high mercury content. Pregnant women and small children should avoid these species entirely. Public health officials estimate that 600,000 American children now have mercury levels in their bodies high enough to cause mental and developmental problems, while 1 woman in 6 in the United States has blood mercury concentrations that would endanger a fetus. Thousands of different natural and synthetic organic chemicals are used in chemical industry to make pesticides, plastics, pharmaceuticals, pigments, and other products that we use in everyday life. Many of these chemicals are highly toxic. Exposure to very low concentrations, perhaps even parts per quadrillion in cases of dioxin, can cause birth defects, genetic disorders, and cancer. And some can persist in the environment because they are resistant to degradation and toxic to organisms that ingest them. The two principal sources of toxic organic chemicals in water are, number one, improper disposal of industrial and household wastes, and number two, pesticide runoff from farm fields, forests, roadsides, golf courses, and of course, our own private lawns. Unusual organic pollutants are now being detected in surface waters in the United States. This chart shows detection frequency of organic wastewater contaminants in a recent United States Geological Survey. Maximum concentrations in water samples are shown above the bars in micrograms per liter. Dominant substances include DEET, which is the insect repellent, caffeine, and triclosan, which comes from antibacterial soaps. Microplastics, the microscopic pieces of plastic, have recently been detected in oceans, lakes, and in drinking waters. Thermal pollution, usually an effluent from a cooling system of a power plant or other industries, alters water temperature. Rising and lowering water temperatures from normal levels can adversely affect water quality and aquatic life. Thermal pollution is one of the most common pollution sources in natural waters in the United States. Sediment is a natural and necessary part of river systems. Sediment fertilizes floodplains and creates fertile deltas, but human activities, chiefly farming and urbanization, greatly accelerate erosion and increase sediment loads in rivers. Silt and sediment are considered the largest sources of water pollution in the United States, being responsible for 40% of the impaired river miles in EPA water quality surveys. Cropland erosion contributes about 25 billion metric tons of soil, sediment, and suspended solids to world surface waters every year. Forest disturbance, road building, urban construction sites, and other sources add at least 50 billion additional tons. This sediment fills lakes and reservoirs, obstructs shipping channels, clogs hydroelectric turbines, and makes purification of drinking water more costly. Sediments smother gravel beds in which insects take refuge and fish lay their eggs, and sunlight is blocked so that plants cannot carry out photosynthesis and oxygen levels decline. Murky, cloudy water also is less attractive for swimming, boating, fishing, and other recreational uses. Sediment washed into the ocean clogs estuaries and coral reefs. In this photograph, we see sediment in the Gulf of Mexico that is carried by the Mississippi River. The greatest impediments to achieving national goals in water quality in both the United States and Canada are sediment, nutrients, and pathogens, especially from non-point discharges of pollutants. These sources are harder to identify and to reduce or treat than are specific point sources. About 3/4 of the water pollution in the United States comes from soil erosion, fallout of air pollutants, and surface runoff from urban areas, farm fields, and feedlots. In the United States, as much as 25% of the 46 million metric tons of fertilizer spread on farmland each year is carried away by runoff.